Welcome to Uniquely Qualified. I'm your friend and host, Liz, and I'm so glad you're here. Uniquely Qualified is a podcast that empowers guests to share their experience, strength, and hope in overcoming challenges in the spirit of mutual healing. We hope you'll leave feeling more aware, connected, and supported in navigating the human experience. I'm excited to introduce today's guest, Chris. Chris has been a friend of mine since 2012 and was the first man I knew that was sober and in recovery. In the years after we met, we weren't in much contact, but when I congratulated him on his sobriety birthday via Facebook a few years ago, I shared that I was recently sober, and we fell into the easy kind of conversation that two recovering addicts enjoy when talking to one another. Chris, welcome to Uniquely Qualified. I'm so glad you're here with us
Thanks.
today.
Thanks so much for having me, Liz.
Yeah, I'm excited for our listeners to get to know you a little bit. And so, for our listeners, I just want to take a brief moment to talk to you directly and let you know that this is going to be formatted a little differently than most of our episodes. So, first of all, this episode will be part of Uniquely Qualified's ongoing recovery series, where I hope that listeners will be educated, inspired, and destigmatized through open and honest conversations about addiction and sobriety. Second, Chris and I hope that people who are intimidated by or have a specific perception of 12-step recovery will see through our conversation that it's not that serious, that it's a lot of listening to and learning from others, and that if two jokers like Chris and me can get sober, any suffering addict can too. This isn't meant to diminish the seriousness of the decision to get sober. It's meant to demystify and highlight the accessibility of working a 12-step program. And finally, Chris and I are also going to embrace the spirit of the 11th tradition of the 12 steps, which states that our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion, and we should always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. Some of you may have noticed that I didn't use my last name today, and that is why. Chris, is there anything else you'd like to add to what I just shared?
Thanks, Liz. I would just add that the principle of anonymity isn't meant to protect you or me as individuals.
Mm-hmm.
It's really meant to protect the group that helped us get sober and helps us stay sober. And then another core tenet of anonymity is humility, which is, this idea that like all members of our 12-step program are equal. I have flaws. Every member of the 12-step program has flaws, and you know I, I don't want my flaws to ever be a reason why someone wouldn't want to walk through those doors if they needed to get sober. And
Mm-hmm.
so another idea of humility is like I did not get sober on my own, and I got sober because of a group of strangers held their hand out and helped me when I most needed it. And gave themselves freely to me, and they too were practicing that core tenet of anonymity through their need to kind of maintain the sacredness of this program that we were in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad that you added that. I think I'll just also piggyback and say that, when alcohol, oh, it's been a cut.
No, you're fine. You
Oh,
can talk
okay.
about alcoholics. Yeah, yeah,
Okay. Sorry.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I interchanged Alcoholics Anonymous and 12-step
You can say
programming.
it. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. If
Okay.
you want to say that, that's fine. Yeah,
Okay. Um,
yeah.
so I guess one of the things that I was wanting to point out was that Alcoholics Anonymous was founded in the 1930s, and that in the 1930s, public perception, cultural awareness of addiction is not the same that it was today. And so at that
Hmm.
time, recovering alcoholics, recovering addicts needed to protect themselves. They needed to be anonymous. Thankfully, that's not the world that Chris and I are living in today, where we can be as freely open as we want to be. But like Chris said, we want to protect the group because we want to make sure that we're also following the principle of attraction rather than promotion. And so that people who might need some help, might need the same kind of support and care that we needed when we came into the rooms, aren't deterred by the personalities that are
Hmm.
Chris and Liz. So I just wanted to add that.
Absolutely.
Just a little bit of context. All right, so let's just launch right in, Chris. What makes you uniquely qualified?
Yeah. So I'm Chris S. I'm an alcoholic in recovery,
Hey,
and
Chris.
and I'm just gonna do what we typically do in the 12-step setting and talk about what my life was like before I came into 12-step program and got sober. what happened to get me into that 12-step program, and then what life has like been since I got
Mm-hmm.
sober and what it's like now. So, first I was born in New York City in the in the mid 80s, and um, came from a family where, I had a great education, a lot of opportunity, two parents in my apartment. Um, so I had a lot of great resources growing up that, I still benefit from hugely to this day. I also became aware at a fairly young age that there was alcoholism and addiction in the family. And I'm talking about like generationally. And it's interesting, like when you look at my family tree, my parents have done this at various times. They've said, "Oh yeah, this grandparent got sober, or this great grandparent, needed to get sober but didn't," and they kind of
Mm-hmm.
go up the line, and it's pretty interesting to see. So I'm not sure with nature versus nurture. I have no answers as to why someone becomes an alcoholic or an addict. I imagine, both nature and nurture contribute greatly. But for me, I had a little bit of both going for me, in that I had what could be a genetic predisposition to addiction, just based on the behaviors of my family members going back a couple of generations, if not more. And then also growing up in New York City, I had a lot of access to alcohol and other substances at a really young age. And I'll tell you, Liz, I remember a couple of years before I took my first drink or tried my first drug, really looking forward to doing so.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember as early as fourth or fifth grade. So what is that, like 11 years old,
Mm-hmm.
just just so wanting to be part of the drinking culture and the drugging culture. And I think it was just like, there was something about that, and it's not because like society necessarily glorified it, or certainly my parents didn't encourage it, but there was something inside me that recognized that alcohol and drugs would take me out of myself, and um and I could just tell that that was something that I would really enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I couldn't wait, to get started with drinking and drugging. And the first time I did really get drunk was also the first time I also got high on drugs too. And it was on a school trip. I was in seventh grade, and I think there was only one other seventh grader, maybe a couple seventh graders on the trip. It was mostly ninth graders, so kids were a
Mm-hmm.
couple years older. And we were on this trip for a week, and we were staying in a hotel. And the first night, the older students are like, cracking out the bottles of liquor and the joints. And I remember thinking, like, man, like this is what I've really been waiting for.
Mm-hmm.
And my goal that night was to get drunk that first night. And I did. I was taking shots. And I remember walking down the hallway of the hotel, and I get to the staircase, and one set of stairs goes up, one set of stairs goes down. And I was so drunk that I couldn't tell which was which, like I couldn't tell up from down when I like got to the staircase.
Yeah.
And I just felt total euphoria. And I'll tell you another thing, Liz, that really kind of keyed me up to that moment was in school in New York City. And I don't know if your school district did this, but they would bring these people, I think it was called Freedom from Chemical Dependency. It's kind of like DARE, where they would
Mm-hmm.
bring people into the school once a year for a few days, and they would talk about their what I call drunkalogs, their drinking and drugging stories. And obviously they would talk about, how it got really bad, and then why they had to get sober. And all I remember is like the drinking and drugging part to where it got really bad. I don't remember them talking much about the other stuff, but I didn't really even care about the kind of like nadir of their stories, where it was like
Mm.
where they were at their lowest. I just remember them talking about how excited they were as young people to get drunk and high. And that's how I felt. And I love that week. Every year at school, I love
Yeah.
that week. I just so look forward to it. And I remember thinking that's going to be me.
Yeah.
Not talking to the students, but that's going to be me like getting drunk and high. And so that moment in the
Mm.
hotel, the first time I get drunk, I, I don't think I had ever been happier in my whole life. And so the next night, um, liquor comes out again. The joints are getting passed around again. And I was like, man, I had so much fun the first night getting drunk. Tonight, I'm just gonna double it, and I'm gonna feel double as good. And so I'm just taking tons of shots. I'm like less than 100 pounds, um, and I wake up, and it's morning. It was night when I was drinking. I wake up and it's morning, and I'm on this like cot in the hotel room, and there's like a bunch of us staying in the hotel room, and I feel amazing. Like I felt like just so fresh and clean. And I wake up and like my roommates are all looking at me like they're like I'm a ghost. Like they're
Whoa.
like their mouths are ajar and their eyes are wide. And I'm like, "What's up, guys? Like, good morning. Like, how's it going?" And they were like, "Chris, do you remember anything about last night?" And I was like, no, like, what do you mean? I actually literally don't remember anything about last night. And they were like, Chris, you like were so drunk that we had to put you into the bed. And then sometime after that, they found me asleep face down in my own vomit in the
Mm.
bed. And they took a
Scary.
photo of it. I wish I still had the photo. My teacher got his hands on it. But it was a famous photo kind of that school year that got passed around of seventh grade Chris. Like, and I told people
Wow.
that the vomit was like really SpaghettiOs and that it was staged and stuff, but it wasn't. And they said they had to
Mm-hmm.
put me in the shower, they had to shower me, change the bed, throw out the sheets, put me back. And that's why I probably felt so great. It was because like, they had to put me in the shower and they changed the sheets on the bed and everything like that. But I didn't remember that at all. And so that was another big plus because even if I have a terrible night, I have no memory of it. So
Mm-hmm.
and what's interesting is like my drinking career kind of progressed unbroken from that point. Um, and I wasn't really a blackout drinker. I can count probably on one or two hands the times that I blacked out,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't something that I did often. But my goal every time I could get my hands on alcohol or drugs was to, basically get outside of myself, to get drunk, to get high, and to try to recreate that feeling of euphoria that I felt that first night. Um, and I just chased that feeling every chance I got. And so going on through, obviously at that time I'm pretty young. I'm still under my parents' supervision. Um, and it's like hard when you're 12, 13, 14 years old to get your hands on alcohol. And
Mm-hmm.
so one of the things that I'm really not proud of is that in eighth grade, in order to get weed and get alcohol and other stuff, I would steal my parents' cash. This was still like
Mm-hmm.
still a cash heavy time. It's like the early 2000s. And
Mm-hmm.
so my parents would keep track cash in their sock drawer, and I'd go in, I'd steal 20 here, 20 there, and I would just try to accumulate it so I could spend it on drugs and alcohol. And this is
Mm-hmm.
in eighth grade. And then finally I got this idea like, man, instead of just stealing like a 20 bill here and there, I could just like take my mom's ATM card and like I can just watch her put in her code and I can get more cash. Maybe I can get like 100.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I did. I looked at her, how she put in the PIN code, and I stole the ATM card and walked down the street. This is in Midtown Manhattan. Put in the ATM card. I think I got out like $200 or more.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow my parents immediately caught me, like right after that.
Hmm.
And it was a big kind of it was a it was just a huge formative moment in my life because it was
Mm-hmm.
like the first time that I was caught doing something that was just like truly uh, inexplicable. Like I was stealing money from my own mother, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm only 13, 14 years old, and I think somehow they put together that I was stealing that money in order to get drugs, but I'm not quite sure how explicit I was about, telling them the whole story. But I
Mm-hmm.
remember at that point was the first conversation of like, we're gonna have to send Chris to rehab.
Oh, okay.
And I was so afraid of going to rehab.
Yeah.
I truly did not. I didn't know what happened at rehab, but like it sounded like prison. Like I just didn't
Mm-hmm.
want to go. Then the next year, in ninth grade, you know, another kind of interesting thing happened. Like I was aware that at my school, if you were caught with drugs or alcohol at school, they had a pretty, I think it was a zero tolerance policy where they would just kick you out of the school. And I had commonly drank and smoked weed at the school,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes experimented with other stuff. And so, but that ninth grade year, I was really keen on going to a competitive private high school. That was like a goal of mine. It's something my older sibling had done. And it was sort of something that it was just a big goal. And so I knew that I couldn't get there if I got kicked out of school. And so that year, I mostly refrained from drinking and doing drugs at school, or at least I dialed back quite a bit that ninth grade year. And, I found that I was pretty happy and I performed well. And, it was kind of like I pleasantly surprised myself that, even though I was getting in some trouble at home, that at school I could kind of pull it together. And so that led me to believe as a ninth grader that I had the ability to kind of like throttle up or down my level of drinking or drugging.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, I would reward myself for long stretches of abstinence with intense periods of using and drinking.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like, I would like feel like so much stress from just not drinking and using
Mm-hmm.
that after a period of time, even though things were going well, and as I said, like I was overall happy in my life, I would have to, in my view, let off steam.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that happened in 10th grade was being from New York City, we don't drive, right? Like, and I didn't get my license till I was 18 years old. But when I was 16 years old, my cousin, who wasn't from New York City, he was from the South, we were visiting my grandpa. And my grandpa, ironically, had just come out of a treatment center for alcoholism. And
Mm-hmm.
he was someone who, we had lived with at times, and someone who was very successful, smart guy. I really loved him, great guy. But if you were to ask me, like, what is an example of an alcoholic? He was sort of the person that was presented to me at an early age of like, hey, Chris, like, this is an alcoholic. This is someone who really struggles when he drinks. And I think, getting into his last couple decades of life, when I would see him, he would drink pretty much around the clock. He would start in the morning and drink until he would pass out. So
Mm-hmm.
my first cousin and I were visiting him in Florida, and you know, about 6 or 7 o'clock, he would drink until he was passed out, and we would steal his car and to get alcohol and go to parties in Florida. And so that's what we did. We'd steal his car every night for this week that we were staying with him. And the first night that I ever drove a car in my life, the first time, I was at a party and I didn't even drive myself there because I didn't have a license. I'd never driven a car before. But in the middle of the party, I'm drunk, I'm high, and I think it'd be a great idea if I just taught myself how to drive. So I took the keys to my cousin's mom's car, my aunt's car, and everybody else is partying. I don't like tell anybody what I'm doing. I just get in the car and I drive really slowly around like this residential neighborhood in Florida. And I'm driving like probably let's say it's like a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. I'm probably driving like 15 miles an hour, just trying to figure out everything. And it wasn't like a
Yeah.
stick shift or anything, but I just, other than movies, I had never seen anybody drive a car. So I, was trying to
Mm-hmm.
learn, okay, I got to put my foot on the brake in order to like put it in a gear and stuff. And even then, I crashed the car in someone's like brick wall. I
Oh,
back it up and I'm still driving. I'm like, okay, that was not good. But I figured there was no like serious damage. And as I turn the corner to go back to my buddy's house, there's a cop car in the driveway with his sirens on, with his lights on.
mm-hmm.
And I'm pulling up really slow. And then I stop in front of the house, and the officer comes up to the car and he's like, "Hey, you know, you're driving the wrong way down a one way." And I
Oh,
was like, no, officer. And he was like, "Have you been drinking?" And I was like, "Yes, like I've been drinking quite a bit." I was so drunk that I was just being honest with him.
yeah.
And he was like taken aback, and he was like, "No one's ever honest with me about that." And so he was like, "What about your cousin? Has your cousin been drinking?" And he was like, "Whose car? Like, can I get your driver's license and,
Yeah, yeah.
registration?" I was like, "Oh, I actually don't have a driver's license. Like, I'm just trying to learn how to drive right now." And didn't know what a registration was. And he's like, "Whose car is this?" I said, "It was my cousin's." He asked if my cousin had been drinking, and I was like, "Absolutely, absolutely, he's been drinking," which he wasn't actually. He was being
Oh no.
a responsible designated driver. So my sober cousin comes out of this party, and you know, he hadn't been drinking, and the cop is like so mean to him, like makes him put his hands on the hood of the car and thinks that
Oh,
my cousin's lying to him. And I'm just so drunk that I felt so good about being honest about me. I just figured I'd you know, snitch on my cousin too, which like falsely. And so
oh,
anyway, it kind of ended up where in that instance, and I just got a ticket for driving without a license, which was a miracle. I didn't
wow.
get a DUI, even though I should have. And then there was a hurricane that came through Florida that year. It was 2004. And the court date for that driving without a license just got canceled. So, like, talk about luck. Like, my first time getting detained by law enforcement, and really my only time, frankly, I I get off scot free. So I'm thinking like, man, this drinking, this drugging thing, it's not even that big a deal. Like just
Mm,
keep doing it. It's making me
mm-hmm.
happy. And so through high school, those next couple of years, I you know, would experiment with more substances, but really my favorite substance was alcohol. And
Mm-hmm.
what I tell people is that like I didn't drink every day, and that every time I drank, I didn't necessarily get drunk, and that every time I got drunk, I didn't get in trouble. But every single time I got in trouble during those years drinking, a, a drink was always involved, right? Like,
Yeah.
so I can't say that I was a daily drinker. I just didn't have access to it as a teenager. But a couple big things that happened was that I failed a drug test at my high school my junior year. And that was sort of like, along with these little kind of consequences that I was piling up that I've talked to you about, that was sort of
Mm-hmm.
like the last straw for my family. And they were like, you know, we're sending Chris to a treatment center.
Mm-hmm.
So at 17 years old, I go to my first inpatient treatment center. And I remember they would have, it was based on a 12-step program, Narcotics Anonymous, and they each gave
Mm,
us a Narcotics Anonymous book. And I remember the first moment walking into that treatment center, it was all young people. So I think it was like people from like the youngest would be like maybe 16, 17, and then the oldest would I think be about like 20, 21. And I walk in and there's a bunch of young people. I'm 17, and the first question that a lot of them ask me is, "What's your DOC? What's your DOC?" And I didn't know what that meant. And they were like, "What's your drug of choice?" And
ah,
I thought that was a weird question, because I was thinking like, I don't discriminate. Like I like all of them,
yeah.
but you know, I didn't know how to answer that question. I don't even remember, Liz, how I did answer that question, but um, I had walked in, I'd already been kind of participating in this New York City, like kind of drug using subculture that really had a large socioeconomic range between people living in the projects and people living like I did in Midtown Manhattan, who had a lot more resources. Um, Certainly more heavily weighted to the latter of rich kids in New York City. But I walk into the second subculture, which is like kids in rehab.
Yeah.
And one thing that I remember about that rehab, I got in a ton of trouble at the rehab, and that was all sober trouble. I wasn't using drugs there or drinking there. But we were just like hooligans in this place. And one of the things is like when you don't have drugs and alcohol, but you have a bunch of addicts together, in one setting, you're gonna have a lot of kids who improvise. So, one of
Mm,
our roommates had a prosthetic leg. I think he had juvenile cancer, and so we were trying to huff his WD-40, and then, it's just stuff like that. So,
hmm
one of the things I really remember though about that treatment center was a bunch of the kids at the end of the day would pray in a small group. I grew up Catholic. I grew up going to church. I wouldn't say I was particularly religious at any point in my life, but at that time, but I certainly wasn't averse to people who wanted to pray or practice their religion and stuff like that. I was just more uncertain. But I joined that prayer group. I remember feeling just so good being part of that prayer group, even though my only goal at that treatment center, Liz, was to not get sent to what was known as aftercare. Aftercare is like extended care. So outside of your first like 28 days in rehab, some kids would get sent to like an additional 90 days program, or even worse, like some were getting referred to halfway houses for months.
yeah.
And some were being referred to like intensive boarding schools that were just like meant for addiction and mental health issues. And my goal was
Mm,
just to go back to my high school and avoid all that. And so I would do this prayer group in part because I genuinely liked it, but also because I wanted to get like an A in rehab and not be recommended for additional treatment.
hmm
And by the time my 28 days was nearing its end, um, I remember telling my counselor in our group session, I was like, "Hey, I'm just so everybody knows, like now, I'm not going to aftercare, and I'd already gotten that recommendation." I told them I was like, "I'm going to drink again." And I'll never forget what the counselor said. I don't remember a lot from that treatment center, but one thing I do is the counselor said to me in front of the whole group, he was like, "Chris, like, looks like you're going to have to do more research." And I
mm,
remember thinking, like, huh, like, so he's not mad at me. I kind of felt like I was taking a risk admitting that I was going to drink again, and that hopefully that wouldn't change the recommendation of me going to more treatment. But I remember thinking, okay, like that sounds like the most fun research I could ever think of doing. Like I love drinking, so of course I'm going to keep doing that.
right.
And I got out of that treatment center, and over the next 11 months or so, it's like I couldn't drink my knowledge that I got about myself and about the disease at that program. I couldn't drink it away fast enough. It's almost like that treatment center like kind of ruined my drinking or accelerated where I was already headed, which was, either jails, institutions, death, or recovery, and
hmm
so it, every time I felt like I would get drunk after leaving that treatment center, I felt like I would like bring myself to another moral rock bottom. And then I would dig a little bit more and get to another rock bottom. And
Yeah.
I would start doing these things that I promised I would never do to myself, to other people, to my family.
hmm
I was just like hurting people more and more. Um, and it got to this one point about 6 months after I got out of that treatment center where I was walking down a hallway at my school, and I felt like just a shell of a person. I felt like I was just living every day to drink, and that I had nothing inside of me. And I kind of recognize that feeling now as anxiety, or just depression. But and alcohol is a depressant, so it very well could have been that, part of that feeling had something to do with the chemical effects of like the drinking that I'd been doing.
hmm
But it was just as an emotional event, it was something that I couldn't forget. Like I just really remember um just feeling completely like vacuous, like that I was just filling this empty, vessel of skin and bone with alcohol in order to feel whole.
Yeah.
Um and some of that also is just being a teenager sucks, right? And it's just super
Yeah.
hard for everybody. But
True.
um I have no doubt, and had no doubt then, that I was an alcoholic, and a lot of that was the way I related to the other people at the rehab that I went to. Well, that summer in between junior and senior year, kind of similar to when I went into the ninth grade and I wanted to do well. That summer, I wanted to go to a good college. And specifically, I really wanted to go to one of the service academies. I wanted to go to the Naval Academy. I thought that
Mm,
if I went to one of the service academies for college, that it would straighten me up, that the military would allow me to have some structure. I'd done a couple sports camps at the Naval Academy, and I really loved the structure. I kind of liked the military culture. And I thought that it would help me get sober if I went to that
yeah.
school.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and also I was starting in that summer before senior year of high school. I was starting to find myself in just like really dangerous situations, situations where I was like either ingesting so much alcohol with other substances that I could physically, you know, get really messed up, or situations where I was just around really dangerous people.
Yeah.
And none of that like necessarily scared me straight, but I just thought like, I'm it was just confirming what I kind of was learning from that rehab that I went to a few months before. I've got a problem and I'm a
Mm-hmm.
liability and I need to fix this problem. And so I remember that summer I called up a bunch of my friends and I was like, "Hey, I'm not going to drink or drug anymore. I just want you to know." And then I
Mm-hmm.
remember sitting my mom and dad down at dinner at the table. And I was like, "Hey, I'm not going to drink anymore. I want to quit completely and no more drugs. It's a problem. I just want you to know." And I felt like I had made this big declaration, and it just felt like it took a lot of courage, and I was kind of like it was almost exhilarating. Like I was like getting born again, sort of like telling people like I'm
Yeah.
not going to drink anymore. Like drinking and drugging was my identity as a
Mm,
teen. And now I'm just going to give it up. And I really meant it. And I walked into an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. Um, oh man, I forget what it's called, but it was on 88th Street in New York City.
mm,
Uh, shoot, but it was a kind of a famous AA meeting in New York, and I walk in by myself. I'm 17 years old. I remember they have this period in the meeting where they give out chips for periods of time from 24 hours all the way up to multiple years. And they say during that part, and now for the most important person in the room, does anyone have 24 hours or a desire for a new way of life? Would you like this 24-hour trip? I raised my hand. I said, I'm Chris, I'm new. And the whole room, there's a bunch of people, they're clapping for me.
mm-hmm.
And that felt good, but also kind of weird. They give me my
Mm-hmm.
24-hour chip. I felt a little bit of like dopamine rush from like the attention, but also, yeah, it just kind of felt like getting baptized, walking to an AA meeting by myself at 17 in New York City and getting that chip. And then after that meeting, a lot of, I think I was the youngest or one of the youngest people in the meeting. And a lot of people came up to me after and they were like giving me their phone numbers and stuff. And I thought that was really weird and I was uncomfortable with that. And then they would tell me to call them. These are just strangers. And I was like really freaked out. And that made me feel like, oh, what is this? Is this like a culty
Mm,
thing? Like I didn't know. And so I got really nervous that if I didn't call one of them, that like maybe uh they would be mad at me or something like that. So I remember like a week later, I didn't go to any more meetings that week, but a week later I like did call one of the guys like, "Hey, it's Chris, like doing well." And he was just like, "Okay, thanks for checking in. Let me know if you
oh,
want to go to a meeting." And it was like not a big
yeah.
deal, but I thought that just going to that meeting, getting that chip, and then just having made that declaration and not drink, that would be enough. Maybe I'd go to a meeting every couple weeks or something.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple weeks later, I'm at my high school girlfriend's apartment, and I had felt so good about making that choice to go sober, and then I'm drunk again,
Mm-hmm.
at my high school girlfriend's apartment. And that's kind of how it went that summer. Like I really tried to get sober on my own, and then 2 weeks later or one week later, I would drink again.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd make the declaration again. I'd call everybody up. I'd really mean it. And then a couple days later, I'd be drunk again. And that just kept happening. Sort of freaked me out because when I made that that statement of I'm going to be sober, I meant it with everything in my being. And
Mm-hmm.
then it just takes a week or two of that willpower to completely disappear.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I felt pretty defeated at that point.
Yeah.
So I start high school my senior year, and one thing that I should say that I think is just part of my story, and I've heard it from others, is that I was diagnosed with ADHD in kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
So I was prescribed Ritalin as like a 5 or 6 year old through grade school.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember part of like going to a service academy, you couldn't be on any kind of medication. And so I remember that senior year, I wasn't on any kind of ADHD medication. And I was just trying to hold it together to get through the year to, get into college. And um, maybe 2 months into my senior year, I'm on probation at school for failing the drug test the year before. And before Thanksgiving of my senior year, I get once again in trouble for drinking on campus, and they kick me out this time. So I'm now expelled from the high school. I felt like I just had the worst luck in the world. I felt like it was really unfair, the circumstances around me getting kicked out. But ultimately it was because I was drinking on campus. And it's like I, even though had wanted to get sober the summer before, um, and had already been to rehab, I still felt like it was just bad luck. It wasn't that I was an alcoholic. I didn't like fully connect all the dots.
Mm-hmm.
But my parents were just so livid, and I had like thrown away my college opportunities at that point. My parents were like, "We don't even want you in the apartment anymore. The
Mm-hmm.
only way that we'll, communicate with you is if you're willing to go to treatment again." And I really did not want to. And I wanted to just be a normal teenager. Like I wanted to just, drink and drug the way I wanted to. I wanted the heat to get off my back. And I was just I was pretty low at that point, getting kicked out of high
Yeah.
school. But I agreed that I would go back to treatment. And this time they recommended think because I don't know what the thinking was, but it turned out to totally change my life. But they recommended not like a normal kind of hospital setting treatment center. They recommended a wilderness program. So I went out to Utah for 6 weeks, and I did this wilderness program for people of all ages, and it was like 18 and up because I just turned 18 right before getting kicked out of high school. And this program, they've changed a lot over the years. I think because of insurance and because of some like questionable practices that the outdoor therapeutic rehab industry had been exposed for doing. But this program doesn't exist anymore. But I went to this program, and one of the things they had was 12-step meetings, just like the previous rehab, except this time you're in like the middle of the desert. And they give you a book, they issue you a book, Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the title of the book. And it was written in 1939 by this group of guys who were, just trying to share with the world how they had gotten sober.
Mm-hmm.
And so they issue you those books, and you have your meeting every night. And I did not want to get sober for the rest of my life or anything like that. I just wanted to stay sober for long enough for my parents to basically trust me again, and to be able to hopefully, get into some high school or get like a GED or something like that. But once again, my goal at that second treatment center was to just not get recommended to go to aftercare,
Mm-hmm.
extended care, or a halfway house or something like that. And so I'm finishing up my time. One of the last things you do at the treatment center is called a vision quest. A lot of it had like sort of Native American themes built into it.
Mm-hmm.
So the way it worked is like they would build the sweat lodge where you would have hot rocks that were burning all night in a fire. And then they would have like these big sticks that you would put animal carcasses over. And it was like it looked like a teepee. And then, this group of clients, I guess you would call us, would go into the sweat lodge tent with our guides who are just like people, frankly, who are only sober, a couple of years usually, who like the outdoors. And we would be in this like sauna in the sweat lodge for a few hours. And then the people who are graduating the program would get sent to these individual sites where they would be by themselves for 72 hours. So
Mm-hmm.
I do my sweat lodge and I get walked out to this site. And one of the things that I noticed about myself at that treatment center was like I was trying to be the most intense at everything. So like when we do the sweat lodge, I would never want to leave during a break. And then when I did my 72-hour Vision Quest solo, I didn't want to eat anything for like the whole day before. And I don't think you were allowed to bring food on the solo, but like I intentionally fasted for even longer than the 72 hours. So I think I fasted for like
Whoa.
86 hours, which for
Oh
me
my
was
gosh.
like pretty hard. So like
Yeah.
the first night of the Vision Quest, I think I'm like sick from hunger, and so I'm throwing up. And I've just done like this 3 hour sweat lodge where you're just drenched in sweat for 3 hours. And so I'm like pretty dehydrated, obviously already hungry, not having had eaten for 24 hours. I'm throwing up, and I still have 3 more days of this solo. And you can't leave your solo site. You have to stay within like a radius of like I think it's like basically like a 10-yard radius. And so I just walked around my circle, and I just walked around it for 3 days, and I just thought about everything I possibly could. And it's such a cool experience for anyone
Yeah.
who could do anything like that. You can, if you can do it safely, it's cool just to be in solitude in the wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
In Utah, we're in Southwest Utah in the Dixie National Forest, which is just a beautiful place,
Mm-hmm.
beautiful desert there. And so I'm walking around, I'm thinking about my life, but no part of me is thinking like I want to actually stay sober. And at the end of that 3-day Vision Quest, I remember they came out and they brought me a like a pamphlet for a halfway house. And I got it and I was like flipping through it, and it looked so lame. It was like a all male halfway house in the Pacific Northwest. I like didn't even know like anything about the Pacific Northwest, but I'm like flipping through it and I was like, man, if I have to go to a halfway house, I'm going to go to Los Angeles. And my big idea was that I was going to go to Los Angeles and I was going to work in a garage because every time I was in a garage in New York City, the attendants were always reading. And when I got to that wilderness program, it was like the first time I'd ever read a book cover to cover, really. Like, obviously in
Mm-hmm.
school, they would make us like read books, but I would just usually bullshit or like go to Cliff Notes or something like that. But I like started reading and really kind of started to enjoy it. And so I figured I could read all the time in LA, and then I could like date a movie star, and that was going to be my life, if I was going to go to the halfway house. So I say that part, Liz, because like that's such insane thinking. And my best thinking at the time was that, like, okay, I'm willing to go to the halfway house if it's in LA and I could work in a garage and date a movie star. But like
Mm-hmm.
the important part of that inner monologue was that I was willing to go to a halfway house.
Yeah.
And so even though they give me this pamphlet to a halfway house, it's not in LA, it's in the Pacific Northwest. And I think I threw it in the fire. That seed of willingness had already been planted.
Mm.
And so my parents came out to the end of that wilderness program. They came out to Utah for like family week or family day or whatever when you're kind of graduating. And you have to like sit in front of your parents. And I remember I had really mean things to say to my parents. And I'm still embarrassed about it to this day, but I basically told both my parents that I hated them and they shouldn't have sent me to this place and all that. But the important part of that meeting was they were like, hey, we're still not going to communicate with you. We're going to have nothing to do with you unless you do go to some kind of sober house.
Mm.
And so I had a choice. Like I was 18, I could kind of be homeless or be on my own or figure something out and make my own way, or I could like stay like somewhat tethered to my family and go to a halfway house. So I chose the latter reluctantly. and I end up taking a flight from Utah to Washington State. um, I I kind of check into this halfway house, and one of the keys to the halfway house, like one of the rules is like I had to go to 12-step meetings. I think it was 2 or 3 a week, and I had to get a sponsor in a 12-step program, or in some kind of recovery program.
Mm-hmm.
And this is in a small town on the Puget Sound in Washington. It was basically like a fishing town sort of, with like a bunch of like retirees too, and kind of like a hippie town.
Yeah.
But the AA club had like a lot of these like old surly like blue collar people in it. And I ended up, getting a sponsor there, and in Alcoholics Anonymous. And that sponsor was someone, they said like pick someone who has what you want in life.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I just like picked like a sponsor who was like working a good construction job because I wanted to get a job, and who had like a cute girlfriend because like I
Yeah.
wanted a cute girlfriend. And so like that was my criteria at the time.
Yeah.
And so this guy, like what he would do is once a week he would take me through the book Alcoholics Anonymous. We would work the steps together. And, the first step is admitting I'm powerless over alcohol and that my life had become unmanageable. It was easy to see that I was powerless over alcohol, even though I didn't want to be sober the rest of my life, because I tried to get sober on my own that summer before senior year and I just couldn't. And then, the other thing is that, was my life unmanageable? Yeah, because I had this goal of graduating high school and like going on to college and doing these specific things. And because of my drinking, I had thrown it all away.
Mm-hmm.
And so the next step is, came to believe that a power greater than myself, than ourselves, could restore us to sanity. And that's sort of like a theoretical step. Like I don't really know what the action is, but for me, it was easy to think that like there was a power bigger than me, because one of the things that I had been true is just being at the treatment center, and then being in the halfway house. I hadn't drank for a few weeks, and it had been a lot longer than the 1 or 2 weeks that I could do on my own. And that
Mm-hmm.
was partly because of like the structure of those programs that I was in, and also because I was following the rules. So like in a sense, like that social norm that was created by the treatment center and the halfway house, that was more powerful than me, because like I was unable to stay sober for any period of time. And
Mm-hmm.
then the third step is made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. And what does that mean for me to turn my will and my life over? Like, just to kind of cut through it, I didn't really know what that stuff meant. All I really knew at
Mm-hmm.
that time was like, I need to not drink, so that I don't get kicked out of the halfway house, so that I'm not like homeless and cut off emotionally from my family.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Even though I was already across the country from where my family was. But I also, there was this fourth step, which really scared me, in the fifth step. And the fourth step is when you write down, it's like the first action step. And you write down an inventory of your resentments, your fears, and your sex inventory. And then the fifth step is you share that with yourself, with a higher power of your understanding. So maybe with God, if you believe in God, and then another person. And it was that fourth and fifth step that really freaked me out, because the sponsor, this guy that I picked to take me through the 12 steps, he was someone that I really liked.
Yeah.
And I didn't want him to like know about like the worst parts of my drinking and drugging. And I didn't want him to know like everything about me that I was embarrassed about, because like a lot of that stuff I didn't want to tell anybody. That's why I was
Mm-hmm.
embarrassed about it.
Right.
And so I left all of that stuff out. Like I didn't like write that on my four step. And I remember like when I did my fifth step, when I shared the list of my resentments, fears, and sex inventory with him, I remember him saying, okay, like, that's the best that you're going to be able to do at this time. And so we'll just keep going through the steps. And I didn't understand like what he meant by that. I thought like maybe he knows that I left stuff off. And I still to this day don't know what he meant, but it like really freaked me out. Like, man, does he know that I left stuff off? And I ended up getting my high school equivalency. I got a diploma from the local public school, but I've never actually been inside of the local public school from which I got this diploma. I just like
Really?
was, yeah, so I was just working in a t-shirt shop in this little town, and upstairs in the attic we had like a few computers, and so I would like do correspondence courses for my senior year when I was like off work. And then yeah, like eventually I just like wrote enough poems or whatever that they gave me a diploma, and that was it. And so
Wow.
I've graduated high school. I'm staying in this town in Washington over the summer. I'm trying to do community college, but it was just like too challenging to do. I was kind of had um my cognitive plate full with just trying to like figure out this 12-step life as an 18-year-old and figure out getting a job. And so I couldn't get through community college classes. But one of my roommates at the halfway house was from the Midwest. He was from Minnesota. And there was a college in Minneapolis that had a sober dorm. And he was going to go there along with a bunch of other people who from this halfway house ended up going to this small college called Augsburg College, because at the time they're one of like two or three colleges in the country in 2006 that had a program for students in recovery. So I ended up, just because my roommate was going to go, I ended up applying to this little school, Augsburg College in Minneapolis. It had a program called the Step Up program, which still exists today. And at the time, I think it had about 30 students in recovery. And so I applied there because the thought of going to college sober was, it just seemed like impossible. Like, how could you not drink in college? I was still at that time 6 months sober, really looking forward to drinking in college. I just again
Right.
wanted to stay sober for a year or so in order to be able to drink the way I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
So I end up going to this college, Augsburg. And one of the rules there was you had to go, I think, to some kind of recovery meeting every week. And they actually had counselors at the college that were part of the sober program that you would meet
Wow.
with once a week or so. And like you also, I think, had to have a sponsor. A lot of people didn't follow these rules, but some people did. And one of the things that I learned at the halfway house was like, those rules, even though I didn't want to follow them on my own, the rule of like going to 12-step meetings and not drinking in the halfway house and like the other little rules that they had, it was leading to me successfully being able to finish high school and like, complete that treatment program in the halfway house. And so when I got to Augsburg, I more or less followed the rules. I was also like extremely wild as a kid, so I would also like break like a lot of silly rules and like did get in a bunch of trouble there completely sober. But I get there and I get a new sponsor. It was like another youngish person who was just like a guy that I looked up to who was in Alcoholics Anonymous, and we start working the steps again. And once again, when I got to that fourth and fifth step, I had a lot of anxiety about being honest about who I was and like the resentments, fears, and the sex inventory that I had. But I ended up just sharing everything honestly with him. And I remember he didn't bat an eye. He was like, all right,
Mm-hmm.
let's move on to the sixth step, and that was
Mm-hmm.
it. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
that was like the biggest thing for me was to like reveal to someone like a lot of it was just stuff that was in my head, but like just like reveal to somebody exactly who I was.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so freeing to be able to do that and kind of get that elephant off of my back.
Mm-hmm.
And and then like have it be received as just like a part of the process. And
Yeah.
so then I go, through my freshman year, I've staying sober, living with other young people, and kind of like the rehab subculture I talked about. Um, when you get young people who are sober, like even if it's for a few months or a couple of years in the same place, it's just going to be totally wild. So it was totally wild, but we weren't drinking. And like I was on probation at the school at one point. I think I like ran from the cops. They caught me peeing on a tree. I joined the cross country team and like the track team. And so like I was always in these like short shorts, and I wanted to see like if I was like fast enough to run from the cop car. And
Oh
like
my gosh.
it turned into like a actual chase, and I was totally sober, and but got in a little bit of trouble for that. And then like, we would just do like silly, stupid stuff. But it was like mostly really innocent, and that was a really fun time, and in between those college years at Augsburg, I spent 2 years there. I started working at a summer program for children who had emotional and behavioral problems, and that was in New England. And my first summer, I was the only sober person there that I knew of, and it was the first time I was around alcohol. I was like a year and a half sober, and it was like because I had done that honest fifth step with my sponsor, I
Mm-hmm.
felt like I had so much confidence just to be around people drinking for the first time at a year and a half sober. And I'm not like recommending that necessarily to people who are in early recovery. I think early recovery, like people's definitions differ, but I would say it's like
Mm-hmm.
the first few years of recovery. But I just had the best summer of my life, even though I was the only sober person. The problem was that I wasn't going to meetings and I wasn't working the steps necessarily that summer. And so I got back to school, got back to that, but the next summer I'm an addict. So I was like, oh, I want like sober friends to be there with me the next summer. So I invited like 10 of my sober friends to like randomly like leave this Minnesota college and like come to New England and to work there with me. So now we had like this gang of AA kids
Yeah.
who were working at the summer camp, and it was just a ton of fun. But um, I still had, from being from New York City and being in an environment where, people were accomplishing great things academically and professionally, the young people from New York City. And so there was a lot of competition to go to a good college and get a good job. And I still really wanted to go to a good college, even though I'd been kicked out of high school. So my sophomore year, I applied to some tough colleges, and most of these were like Hail Marys. I didn't actually think I could get in, but I ended up getting accepted to a couple of them, and I end up enrolling for my junior year to Georgetown in DC. And I felt like my first day at Georgetown such an imposter. And Georgetown's a
Mm.
Jesuit school, so meaning it's a Catholic school, and the Jesuit motto is women and men in service of others. And Jesuits are Catholic priests who, in addition to taking the vow of celibacy that all Catholic priests do, and they never marry and they're not supposed to have sex, the Jesuits also take a vow of poverty. So they might be lawyers or doctors, but they're not going to keep their salary. They give it all back to the church. And these are really smart people, these Jesuits. But I remember seeing one my first day as like I'm bringing my bags to my dorm. And I was so nervous, Liz, because this is going to be the first time that I'm in like a school environment where I'm away from my sober friends.
Mm-hmm.
And I see this priest walking into my dorm, and I like physically like grab him, and I was like, "Hey, Father, like I need to talk to you. I'm gonna drink." And he's like, "Oh, like he doesn't know have any context." He's like, "Okay, like come up and we can talk about it." In my apartment, he ended up living on my floor, and I'm sitting in his apartment on the couch, and he's like, "So tell me what's wrong." I was like, I'm just new to this school. I'm a transfer student. I'm worried about drinking. I'm 2.5 years sober." And he was like, "Well, you haven't drank in 2.5 years. Like, how did you do that?" And I was like, "Oh, well, I've been going to AA and doing the 12 steps." And he's like, "Oh, okay. Like, why don't you just keep doing that then?" And like to me, it was an epiphany. It was like,
Yeah.
okay, I probably should. So down the street from Georgetown is an AA club,
Mm.
and it's called the West Side Club. And I walked down there, and one thing, Liz, that it's important to remember and to point out from my story is being a young person in recovery. At that point, I was about to turn 21. I didn't actually want anything to do with like the social element of recovery. Like, I didn't want to be
Yeah.
friends with people from AA unless they were like the other young people from my school or something like that, or in my halfway house. I I didn't want to be associated with someone in 12-step recovery because I didn't want to be known as like an alcoholic or an addict. And I also just I wanted like a separate life. Like I craved having just like a normal college experience. And so in college at Georgetown, I would go to those meetings, but I wouldn't like hang out with anybody from the meetings afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And um, I remember for my third anniversary, when I'm getting my chip for my 3 years sober, I raise my hand and I share in the meeting, I'm Chris, I'm an alcoholic. I have been coming to these meetings for 3 years and I've always had a sponsor for the most part and worked the steps, but I've never felt like a member of AA.
Mm.
And at the end of this meeting, this guy taps me on the shoulder and I turn around and he looks like Ben Franklin. And he's like, "Hey, I'm Larry." And, um, you know, I'd heard of this guy because like I
Oh.
heard there was this guy who was like a big speaker in the area named Larry, and he would go around and he would sponsor a lot of people and help a lot of people in AA. And I remember thinking like if I ever meet that guy, I want to stay away from him because he sounds like he's like really into it. And I was trying to be like kind of AA adjacent, not really be part of
Mm.
it.
Sure.
And he was like, "Hey, I'm Larry. If you don't feel like I'm part of AA, like have you thought about like getting a service position in the meeting?" And that's all he said at the time. And, that's a big part of getting sober is like AA meetings. There's no one who like works at the AA meeting. It's all
Right.
volunteer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you need someone to make the coffee. You need someone to set the tables up. A lot of these meetings are in like church basements or YMCA's or something like that, or community centers or VFWs, like anywhere that has like a cheap room for the group to rent because there's no hierarchy in AA. There's no head of it. It's all volunteer, right? Like, and that's one of the things that drew me to it. But so because it's all volunteer, they needed someone for a speaker meeting. You'd have to have someone pick the speakers. So every Wednesday night, I did get a service position. I ended up asking Larry to be my sponsor, despite my kind of apprehension of even meeting him in the first place. And I would pick the speakers every night for my first year that I was at Georgetown, and it was pretty cool because like I got pretty into it. And even though there was like I remember one year there was a big snowstorm in DC in 2009, and like no one could drive or go anywhere, and it was called Snowmageddon. And I like trudged through the snow down the street to the AA meeting, and I think a couple people showed up and we had a meeting and I picked a speaker. Like it was just like
Mm-hmm.
it just really got me to feel like a member. And I just want to talk a little bit about that sponsor, Larry. He
Mm-hmm.
was an older guy. He had, I think, around 30 years of sobriety. He was a blue collar guy, and he was just like a regular salesman. I don't even remember what he sold, but he would travel all around the mid Atlantic in his truck selling like software or whatever to trucking companies. And he would also always have in the back of his truck like a library of recovery literature
Mm-hmm.
and spiritual literature, and he would just give books to people outside out of the back of his car, and he was always going to meetings, and he sponsored dozens of men in recovery. And Larry sort of became for me like he was like a parent in a way and an AA sponsor. But what he did was just right out of the book, he would just take me through the book Alcoholics Anonymous and just go through this 12 steps. Like there was no magic to what he did. He just did it consistently, and he was so selfless. And he would come to like my college sports events, and I started introducing like my college girlfriends to him for his
Oh.
approval and stuff like that. But it wasn't like he even we had a party. We were getting evicted from our college like living area, and because like the owner of the house wanted to sell the house, so he evicted all the tenants, and so we had an eviction party in DC. And like Larry, who was I think like 70 at the time, was the bouncer at the party. And like so like that like normal college experience that I craved, I had and was able to like be around drinking and stuff like that because I was also doing the 12 steps at the same time with my sponsor Larry and with other young people in the DC 12 step community. So I bring up Larry because when he passed away in 2018, even though he was just a normal guy, his funeral was like standing room only. I mean, this church
Wow.
was completely packed of people that he had helped. And it was just so moving to see. And when he died, I was in law school. And
Mm-hmm.
so just like kind of to fast forward, yeah, I graduate college. I'm still doing AA. I work on Capitol Hill for a couple of years, which was a lot of fun. I actually got to go to an AA meeting that was in the United States Capitol building. I don't know if they still have
What?
it, but it was like in
That's
the
so
in the
cool.
building itself. Yeah, so like you walk under the rotunda and up the flight of stairs, and there was an AA meeting there, and um and so I went to
Wow.
that pretty regularly. But um, I then just wanted to kind of, because of like the college that I went to, the Jesuit education, and also being a young person in recovery, that idea of serving others was important to me. So I applied for this AmeriCorps program, which placed you in to teach in a high school in a low income community. So I
Mm-hmm.
get placed in Alabama. That's where I met you. You were my
Yeah,
I think you were my were you my social studies like mentor when I
I
was a new
was.
teacher?
I was
Yeah,
your content leader. Yeah,
that's right.
that's
Yes.
wild.
So
That's like
you gave
this.
me, so when I became a new high school teacher at 25 years old, you were giving me all the lesson plans that I would use. And I basically just stole from you for that first year.
I was happy
But,
to
you
share.
know, it was, that was an interesting time because teaching, is, you can probably attest, was so hard, especially
Hmm.
doing it in a school that was, deemed a low performing school in an area where there was a high concentration of students from low income homes.
Yeah.
Teaching just took all of my energy, especially that first year. My first day teaching was probably one of the hardest professional days of my whole life.
Same.
And so
Same.
I really throttled back on the AA. I would probably go to like one meeting a week.
Hmm.
And in college, I was probably going to like 3 to 5 meetings a week. The first year, I'd go to 7 meetings a week at least.
Yeah.
And so now I'm like 5 years sober, so I'm throttling it back. Larry's in Maryland and I'm in Alabama, so I'm not talking to my sponsor as much. And that was a stressful time. And during those years teaching, I taught in Alabama for 4 years. I really got to experience this phenomenon where no matter how long I've been sober, if I like pull back from doing 12 step work, I'm gonna eventually feel that pain of like,
Yeah.
not doing what got me sober in the first place. And it wasn't like I was gonna drink or anything like that, but I was starting to feel just like unable to deal with the stress of my job and all that job required, teaching in that school. The
Hmm.
school eventually got shut down,
Mm.
but it was like the most rewarding job I'll ever have as well. And I still keep in touch with a good number of the students from the school. But um, I really suffered. My program really suffered because I let it. It didn't have to. It wasn't the job's fault. It was just me prioritizing something over my recovery.
Mm.
And by the time I was finishing up at that job, I was about 10 years sober. And I remember like just being so anxious. And one of the things that was like made clear to me was that I could benefit from, therapy and getting outside help. And that took 10 years of sobriety for me to
Mm.
realize, like
Yeah.
I had done some counseling like twice a year when I was a kid to get the Ritalin prescription. Like you'd have to
Sure.
go see a doctor or a
Yeah.
psychiatrist or whatever, and
Hmm.
he'd prescribe it. But it wasn't a big part of my life. And in AA, I sort of saw it as like there is like a group therapeutic aspect to an AA meeting,
Yeah.
but I just felt so anxious. And that was where I was introduced to therapy. I actually ended up talking for years with a counselor of mine that I had when I was a teenager in New York City. She was like an outpatient drug counselor that I saw when I was 16. And I ended up just calling her up and I would talk to her periodically. And I thought that was like hugely beneficial.
Yeah.
Her name is Dr. Jeanette Friedman, and she was just an incredible human being. But another thing that I realized was that at 10 years sober, I still was struggling with stress and like being in my own head and getting depressed sometimes. And acting out addictively in other areas. Like, and that's something that I just didn't foresee when I got sober. Um, I didn't foresee that like I would be an addict in terms of like anything that felt good that got me out of my own head. And like you name it, like sugar, exercise, not exercise, like relationships. Thank God I've never gambled, but like anything that like gets me out of my own head that I enjoy, I will do to excess, anything to this day. And that's something that has been a big theme in my like longer term recovery as a young person. But I ended up from after teaching, the school that I taught at got shut down in Huntsville, Alabama, and I didn't want to teach at another school. They did open up a school across the street with a different name, but I think I had four principals in 4 years. So I was
Mm,
getting a little bit burnt out. So I decided to go to law school. Um, I'd never been a phenomenal student. And so to me, law school just seemed like this great challenge. And it's kind of like the same thing happened. I was going to some AA, but I, wasn't connected to a sponsor. Larry died my first year of law school.
oh,
And because law school was so challenging for me, I prioritized this like needing to study over my program. And, my mental health just really struggles when I don't do the 12 steps. Like, I need to, and but by that, what I mean is like, I need to be doing the steps with a sponsor of my own, and I need to be working with newcomers. And so by the end of law school, my last year, COVID was kind of taking over everybody's consciousness, and that's where as you said at the beginning, Liz, like I realized you were sober,
mm-hmm,
and one of the blessings of COVID as a sober person is I got to connect with people all over the country and world who were
mm-hmm,
in AA for that year period or so where we like would do Zoom meetings all the time,
mm-hmm,
and that was a huge blessing, but I needed to get a sponsor. And so I decided that I wasn't going to move back home long term and work as a lawyer after law school. I kind of followed my childhood dream of joining the military. So I'm currently in the military as a lawyer. And a big part of my life today is just working with other service members who struggle with alcoholism.
yeah,
So, my first base was in North Carolina. It was actually the biggest military base in the world, Fort Bragg, which is now called Fort Liberty. And we
mm,
had multiple AA meetings on Fort Liberty that are still going. And now I'm on this tiny base in Florida, and there's only a couple thousand people on this base. I think Fort Liberty has like I want to say it's like close to 100,000 people,
wow,
with
yeah,
100,000 service members. And now I'm on a much smaller compound, but we also have a meeting there, and a good chunk of people show up every week. And it's like the thing that if I prioritize my recovery, everything else will fall into place in my life. And like most importantly, inside, I'll feel happy and helpful and whole.
mm-hmm,
Anything that I prioritize above recovery, whether it's even good things like my marriage or my job or anything else, like if I prioritize it before recovery, those tend to be the first things that start to suffer as a result of me not putting my recovery first. And being in the military is a blessing because a lot of us who join the military do so because either you're seeking adventure or a lot of people, it's kind of like the up and out of their living situations. And a lot of people, like the thing that initially drew me to the military was I thought it was going to fix me, right? And
mm-hmm,
I had this God-sized hole inside of me that I thought being a Marine or going to a service academy would fix. And so now in the Army, which the service that I'm in, I get to work with so many people that are just like me, but in the recovery context. And it's extremely rewarding because our service members are people that, I've always looked up to, but they're also people that the ones who do struggle with alcoholism and addiction, many of them who've seen combat are also struggling with the effects of that and, combat related stress or traumatic brain injury. They've got
Yeah.
multiple things going on. And even though I love my job for a lot of other reasons, I do think one of the main reasons for being in the military is to work with other service members. And I just a couple weeks ago celebrated 19 years of recovery, and to me, that's like it just kind of reminds me of how old I am. It doesn't really mean like I'm 19 times wiser than I was at the end of my first year. But it's cool because a lot of the service members that I work with, they're just going to AA for the first time.
Mm.
Or maybe they got in trouble and the judge is forcing them to go to meetings.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I've learned these last couple of years is that my problem was not drugs and alcohol. My problem is being sober and always has been.
Mm.
And the solution to being sober is I could drink and drug, but then I would like go through all the same bad consequences that I already experienced before I got sober 19 years ago. Or conversely, I could do what has worked for me and worked for me in that first year of recovery and has worked for me since, which is just practice the 12 steps with other alcoholics. And what that really looks like is what we're doing right now. It's just like
Right.
one alcoholic talking to another. And, you know, if I recognize that like this is a daily, not battle, but this is like a daily journey that I have to walk,
Mm-hmm.
then, it's a lot, it's a lot more just in line with reality because this is not
Mm-hmm.
like there is no cure for me. I don't think like I'll ever be cured from like what my brain is like or who I am. But I
Mm.
do think that if I practice the principles of recovery and I do the 12 steps and I work with newcomers, that I'll get that, as we say, daily reprieve
Mm-hmm.
where I'm not going to want to take a drink. And frankly, I haven't wanted to take a drink for probably like 18 or 17 years. There might have been a couple times in the last 19 years where I've like fantasized a little bit about it or been like really upset and like threatened to do it, but not seriously considered taking any steps towards drinking since that first couple of years of recovery.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's sort of where I'm at now, and I really appreciate you letting me tell my story. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. And that was just so great to hear I've never heard your story like that, like kind of like the from bookend to bookend. Happy 19th birthday. I'm
Thank you
so
so
excited that
much.
we're recording this within the week of you taking that 19 years. Also, I'm sorry if I'm distracted. My dog is demanding my attention right now, so I apologize if
No,
you're seeing
what
me.
kind of dog do you have?
She's a border collie.
Oh,
She's actually a
cool.
huge part of my sobriety story in that I adopted her on April 19th and I checked myself into detox on June 10th.
Oh,
Where
wow.
like I couldn't have both. I couldn't be a dog mom of an 8 week old border collie puppy and drink the way that I was drinking. So
Yeah,
that's a story for another time. But I did want to double back on like relate to you on a couple of the things that you said, if that's a cool direction for us to go right now.
absolutely.
Cool. So I wanted to talk about Larry and I want to talk about service because one of the things that I really related to on that, which as you were talking about your story, it was I found myself smiling because we both arrived at the same destination, but coming at it from two completely different angles. So
Mm,
I chose my sponsor because she just celebrated 30 years of continuous sobriety
wow.
in July, and she is in her 70s. She has been in her 70s as long as I've known her. And I knew that she sponsored a shit ton of women at the meeting that I went to, my home group.
Okay.
And I knew that that fourth and fifth step was coming. And I was like, I want a sponsor who is talking to a lot of women so that when I bare
Mm,
my soul to her and I tell her all the choices that I made that I'm so embarrassed about, but that I know I have to disclose, that she's probably going to have probably will have heard something similar to it before.
sure.
And but also she embodies service to me. Her,
Mm,
like, she is all about get out of yourself and into service. And like the first one of the first days I met her, I was kind of, like sussing her out, like, is this who I want to be my sponsor? And I asked her something, and she just said, "Oh, Liz, love and tolerance is our code, and love, 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 love." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, like that!" Like I just didn't find that anywhere until I found myself in community with other sober people, where it was like
Yes.
an ideal of like help fellow man and love one another unconditionally, but then it was the people in 12 step that showed me that it was possible. So I guess I my question to you, after like relating to you, what has been Larry's legacy in your life and how you sponsor other men?
Larry put his sponsees before himself.
Mm,
And so, and my sponsor now does the same thing. My sponsor now is also in the military, and he's actually forward deployed to another continent right now.
mm,
And he does the same thing where, if I need to talk to my sponsor, there are ways that I can get in touch with him on short notice. And even though the time difference is significant, he will drop what he's doing if I needed to talk to him. And
yeah.
Larry is the same way. Um, Again, he would just, I don't know how he was able to like pack 40 hours of helping people into every 24-hour period, but he did.
Yeah. Yeah.
And um I'm not even close to that. And you know, if any of Larry's other sponsees ever see this, they'll agree. And when we
Mm-hmm.
get together, we talk about it. And we're all just trying to be just a fraction of being as helpful to other alcoholics as Larry was. And honestly, like if my life is just a fraction of being as impactful to people as Larry was to me, then I'll be extremely grateful for that.
Oh, that's really beautiful. Thank you, Larry. We love you.
Yeah, we do.
Another thing I wanted to touch on was therapy. So this is another one of those things where I arrive at a spot, you arrive at a spot, we arrive at it from totally different angles. So I didn't get sober until I had been working with a therapist for 4 years, and that is not everybody's path. For me, what I
Mm-hmm.
realized is I needed to practice being honest, and I happened
Mm-hmm.
to be really fortunate. I had some stuff I needed to unpack. I was suffering tremendously. I was a daily drinker. I was a blackout drinker. But I started getting honest with my therapist. And it was her who was like pointing out to me the dangers of drinking the way that I was drinking, and the health risk I was presenting to myself. And she did it in the most
Mm-hmm.
loving way. And if it wasn't for that, I don't know that I would have, and like I don't know where I'd be. Um, but I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about some of the ways that therapy has complemented your 12-step recovery, or ways that you use like both of them to help you
Mm-hmm.
have like the most happy and serene life possible.
No, absolutely. And I'll be honest, Liz, therapy hasn't been a, a prominent part of my recovery, but that's not for lack of wanting it to be. It's
Mm,
mostly just something that I haven't prioritized yet. But like the the limited interaction that I've had with therapy since being sober, and again, it started when I was 10 years sober,
yeah.
what it has illuminated for me was that this idea that I had that after being sober for a period of time, I would be cured or converted
Mm-hmm.
to some better version of me. That idea is not true for me,
Mm-hmm.
and things like going to law school I thought would rewire my brain so I'd like not be scatterbrained anymore and I'd be able to just like sit down and read a book.
Mm-hmm.
I could force myself to hyper focus during law school and sit down and read, large mundane texts, but it didn't rewire my brain. It's just like I was able to do it because it was sort of this dopamine seeking addictive thing that I was chasing was the law school diploma. Same thing with joining the military. Like that hasn't rewired my brain, so to speak. And I kind of thought it would, but so therapy has illuminated for me that like honestly, the 12 steps in AA are something that I just need to keep doing for me. They've been really helpful for me. And I'm never going to graduate it. I thought that when I had a year sober that I could graduate AA and just stop going. And now I don't have that feeling anymore. I feel like a beginner. And I've felt like a beginner for the last 19 years. And I'm still trying to get to that like intermediate level of AA, but haven't quite gotten there. And then I do aspire to make therapy through like not necessarily like typical therapy, but like cognitive performance coaching is like what the military calls it. And I don't think they just do that because they're trying to like dress up therapy, which might be like even more stigmatized in the military community as it is for regular civilians. In my job, there are certain things that are extremely stressful, like physically and mentally. And, I think that performance coaching is something that's just necessary to get to that next level. And so I've actually been working with a guy who is the performance coach for a professional football team, and he's helping me get through some of these really challenging schools and courses that I've been doing in the military. So, Liz, before the internet checked out,
Yeah.
you were asking me about therapy and what that's been like as part of my program. I'll be
Hmm.
honest, therapy hasn't been like a huge part of the last 19 years of recovery, but that's not because I don't think it should be. The first 10 years, I was so ignorant. I thought that basically the longer that I was sober, the healthier I would just automatically get. I thought that I would
Yeah.
be like cured from whatever the mental illness is that causes alcoholism or addiction. I thought that just abstinence from alcohol or substances would cure that, and it obviously doesn't. When you take alcohol away from an alcoholic, you still have an alcoholic who just
Right.
doesn't have alcohol.
Yeah.
And the 12 steps are the solution for not drinking one day at a time, but then there's all this other stuff we can do to obviously be healthy.
Mm.
Like exercise and eating well and therapy. That's all part of it. And one of the things that in the army, I've heard some like incredibly accomplished special operators talk about how, why would we not treat our brains any differently as like a tool for our even just professional success as we would our bodies in the military. And so one thing that
Yeah.
we're seeing in the military is that, cognitive performance, mental health performance, that stuff is being increasingly more prioritized and valued just in the military. And
Yeah.
and so for me, what therapy did for me is it really put a mirror up to me and showed me that just years of abstinence does not directly correlate to like better mental health or
Hmm.
certainly if I drink or drug, I can pretty much throw out any chance of having decent mental health out the window. I
Hmm.
can't drink or drug, period. It's just going to take me back to that place where it's going to be like jails, institutions, or death for me.
Yeah.
But what therapy did at 10 years sober is it taught me about things like, you know, anxiety and depression and just the need to be metacognitive, to be thinking about how I think.
Yeah.
And paradoxically, even though I haven't done therapy consistently in the last 9 years since the first time I went at 10 years sober, now in the military, I'm starting to incorporate, they call it like cognitive performance, but some of the
Mm.
things that I'm trying to do in the military are pretty mentally and physically taxing,
Yeah.
especially for me as a 37-year-old. And
Hmm.
so right now I've been working on, um, I guess you could call it therapy, but it's like cognitive performance with a guy who he is actually his name is Andy Rise, and he's the cognitive performance coach for the Chicago Bears.
Oh, very
And
cool.
he's an Army veteran and retired from the Army, and he was the person who helped me get through a challenging, assessment selection program in the Army, and he's like still helping me as I try to do some other hard Army stuff, um, and yeah, I mean, it's been pretty cool because what he's been doing is just breaking down like what are my values and what are my belief systems,
Mm-hmm.
and I just had to go through this basically this job hiring process in the Army, and um, part of it was like a lot of hours of psychological testing and then an interview with a psychologist, and then you do a board, and at the board they like tear apart, like who I am like at the seams, right? Like they're trying to like
Yeah.
really get to know exactly who it is that they may hire.
Yeah.
And if I didn't work with Andy, the cognitive performance coach for the Bears, I would have not been successful in that interview, because like what I've
Mm-hmm.
been doing with Andy is just like really getting down to like what is it that I believe in,
Mm-hmm.
and so much of what it comes down to is stuff that I learned through recovery, and like
Yeah.
growing up. I've basically grown up sober, and I
Yeah.
got sober a few days after my 18th birthday, and it's just had such a big impact on my worldview. So therapy, performance coaching, whatever you want to call it, it's something that I hope to incorporate more and more in my journey. And
Mm-hmm.
I just think that if I want to be successful in anything, that I'll have to incorporate therapy in some form.
Mm-hmm. That's so cool that you worked with that cognitive coach, and I just feel like it really does highlight that there's different tools and resources that we can pick up along the way that can help us, and especially if we have like recovering addicts like you and I who have a 12-step foundation where all of those
Mhm.
things just help us be a little bit better one day at a time.
Absolutely.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for being here. This has been just so great for me. Thank you for sharing your story. I would just like to now ask you the final three questions that I ask all of my guests, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So, Chris, if you could go back to right before you got sober, what would you say to that younger 18-year-old version of yourself?
I would say that alcohol is just a symptom. It's not the
Mm,
problem. And I would, I could probably save myself and other people a lot of pain and a lot of time if I could have. Now, I don't think I could have gotten through my 18-year-old self on anything because I was
yeah.
really, really stubborn and still am. But if I could have gotten through to him and let my 18-year-old self know that like not drinking is just like step zero of this journey. The things that cause people to drink alcoholically and use addictively, that has nothing to do with the substances themselves. And that's going to be the daily work for the rest of my life. And that's just, I think, how my brain is. I think it's just the way, yeah, I think my brain is such that like a normal person, when they take a hot shower, or let's just say they see their Christmas tree lit up for the first time, they get like a rush of whatever chemicals that make them feel good.
Hmm.
And for me to get that same feeling, I need to see like the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree
Yeah,
lit up.
right.
That's
Yeah.
that's just my brain.
Yeah, yeah. I'm laughing not because it's just really funny, but because I so totally relate, and I
Yeah.
think a lot of people that are either currently suffering from addiction or in recovery could relate to that as well. Okay, second question. What has been the most helpful tool or resource in navigating your challenges?
12-step recovery. Yeah, there's
Slam dunk.
other recovery programs out there um that I've heard of, and I've like, been to a couple of those meetings. There's like more religious based recovery. I think it's
Hmm.
called Celebrate Recovery. There's like Smart Recovery, and
Hmm.
I don't know much about that, but um, the, what I would say is like if somebody goes to an AA meeting and they don't have a good experience, just try another one.
Yeah.
If you need to get sober and you're having a hard time getting sober on your own, because um, again, there's no like hierarchy in AA. There's no like organization. There's no leadership. It's just groups of alcoholics getting together.
Hmm.
And so if you're not connecting with one meeting, I would just say try another. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I would A is like completely different, based on like who is in the room with you. But the principles of like the 12 steps, that's that's always helped me. And it's something that I am never going to be complete with, like it's something
Mm-hmm.
that I can easily do my whole life and still be far from uh be far from perfection and doing the 12 steps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate you naming those other recovery groups. I have personally attended a refuge recovery meeting, which is a Buddhism
Hmm.
based one. I
Yeah, I've
would
been to a couple
totally,
of those
yeah,
meetings.
and I would give it another chance. I just wasn't doing any sort of recovery work when I went in the door, and they were like, "We make all our newcomers speak," and I just bawled the whole time. This was years before
Yeah.
I actually ended up getting sober. But what I also want to highlight about what you were saying about recovery groups and the role of 12 step in your life is that a lot of these were founded because people can't do this alone. We need
Hmm.
another person and or other people. And like for me, my first higher power was God, group of drunks, because I could get into it another time, but
Yeah.
like couldn't didn't want to attach any like organized religion at that time.
Hmm.
And I just think it's so important, and it's a tenet of this podcast is mutual healing, connection and
Mm.
mutual healing, because I think that that is how we, regardless of what you're recovering from, be it like a physical something or you lost somebody or you're recovering from an addiction like you and I have experience with, asking for help and receiving help are just, such game changers for people grappling with suffering. So I just,
They are.
yeah. Okay, Chris, last question I have for you. If you could say anything to someone out there who is relating to your story, what would you say to them?
I would say just give Liz or me a call,
That's right.
like and yeah, just reach out to us, and if you're struggling with drinking, that's kind of what we do in recovery
Hmm.
is we help people, and that's how we stay sober.
Yeah, well said. And thank you so much for your time, for your candor, for your service. I just have loved having you on.
Thanks so much for having me, Liz. It's awesome
Thank
to reconnect with you.
Yeah. All right, I'm just going to read the last few things for our listeners here and then we'll sign off for the day. So if you or a loved one is looking for a solution to addiction, you can head to aa.org to learn more about resources available to you. You could also go to na.org. All of those recovery groups that Chris and I mentioned, they also have websites as well. Um, Additionally, Chris said, reach out to either of us. Please feel free to direct message me on the Uniquely Qualified Pod Instagram account, and I can help make sure you get connected with somebody. You can also email uniquelyqualifiedpod@gmail.com. And as I said, if you're struggling with drug or alcohol or any other addiction, just we're here to be of service to other people. So let us know. If you don't follow us on Instagram or on Spotify, please do. We are currently only available on Spotify, so please give us 5 stars, follow us, be very much appreciated. And the week that we publish Chris's podcast, we will have specific resources and content that relates to his story and his lived experiences. And with that, I want to thank everybody so much for their time and attention. And please remember, we are all uniquely qualified.